first Friday. Yeah, and it's beautiful day out there, and I would like to, we've got a slightly different setup this time, because instead of having 3 artists all trying to cram themselves into an hour-long session, sorry, that was, I'm not very good at multitasking, and that was a message coming in from Manu, who probably can't join us. So we only got 2 artists this time, so we're going to hopefully allow a little bit more space and time for conversation. And then if we have time at the end, I'd like to have a bit of a general chat about starting to transition First Friday into a hybrid session, so that we still meet like this online, but we also are able to meet in a physical space for those who are local. So if there's time, we'll talk about that. If there isn't time, you should feel free to send me your thoughts about that, because I know that everybody who's not local very much wants us to keep this going.
Where are you going, James?
Well, I don't know. I need to get some lunch, I guess. Are you doing lecture?
So I'm going to invite Anne to start the proceedings. Anne, if you can kick off, I will spotlight you.
Okay. Hi. So I'm Anne Krinsky, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my practice first and how I arrived at my recent project about South Coast wetlands. So I'm going to share my screen. Hold on just a second.
Yeah, we have it.
Let me just. Okay. So I work across digital and analog platforms. I work with paint, print, photography, and video to investigate overlooked structures in the natural and lived environments. I'm fascinated by the passage of time and change in the physical world. Research underpins my practice, and I've made installations in response to archived collections in the US, UK, and India. I trained as a printmaker, and layering of images, ideas, and media lies at the heart of my practice. 5 years ago, I created a project called Tideline Thames for London's Totally Thames Festival, which is an annual festival across the month of September in London. Tideline Thames was about the river and its architecture between high and low tide lines, the maritime and industrial structures that are covered up by water every day. I photographed docks, walls, jetties, and river stairs as the starting point for work in other media. The project culminated with 2 exhibitions. One was called Tropical Thames in Crossrail Place Roof Garden, which was commissioned by Canary Wharf Arts. And the other was a video installation in the Brunel Museum's Thames Tunnel Shaft, which was the first tunnel that was built under the river. In the course of watching the tidal river erode metal, wood, and stone, I began to think about coastal communities and threats from rising sea levels to communities and habitat. And that led me to a project about vulnerable wetlands in a range of river and coastal locations. And I've been working on that since 2018. The first wetland I investigated was in the Thames estuary, moving from London out towards the sea. And I had a residency with Metal in Southend and documented the industrialized Thames estuary, which has been severely impacted by fossil fuel shipping and waste disposal industries. I found myself in the ambivalent position of being attracted to these industrial structures for their visual and formal qualities, while at the same time knowing that these industries had caused huge environmental damage. And then I did some research at an inland wetland on the River Nab in Bavaria during a residency. It was June and the river levels were dropping and tree roots were exposed and little islands were forming in the river. And I worked with those photographs to create an installation of 10 digital scrolls for St. Augustine's Tower in Hackney, which is the 13th century clock tower. So these were 4 of them. They're 2 meters high. So let's go back to the south coast of England. I had visited wetlands in the North Solent, which are an important habitat for migrating seabirds, and I love the area. I thought that South Coast wetlands would be accessible to me living in London. And as I wanted to exhibit the work in the same region that I did the research, I approached Emma Walder, who's the curator of the Worthing Museum and Art Gallery, to propose an exhibition. And that exhibition was postponed due to COVID. In the meantime, I saw an open call to exhibit outdoors on the Worthing seafront, and I couldn't resist the chance to have work about the South Coast exhibited within a stone's throw of the ocean. In the end, the 2 shows, Fugitive at the Worthing Museum and Art Gallery and Wetlands Shifting Shorelines on the seacoast, ran in tandem. Both exhibitions were inspired by wetlands I visited in 2020 and 2021, and both exhibitions have just ended. In fact, the seafront exhibition is coming down as we speak. My process in making digital prints is a bit convoluted. On the South Coast, I took hundreds of photographs in wetland locations, including Lymington and Key Haven reserves, and Chichester, Portsmouth, and Pagham harbors. Back in my studio, I projected wetlands photos onto objects and surfaces, prints, other wetland images, paintings, even the studio walls. I then rephotographed the projected images, combining source materials from different locations and capturing the illumination of projected light. Working with this image archive, I layered imagery in Photoshop to design and configure prints for both Worthing locations. So first I'm going to show you some installation shots and prints from wetland shifting shorelines on the Worthing seafront. In 2020, Worthing Borough Council put up 5 gabions on the seafront as a way to show artwork during the pandemic. These are adjacent to the promenade and the sea, and there's an accessible walkway that goes around the gabions. There are 5 of them and they hold 4 artworks each. These are printed on aluminum and each image is 90 by 90 centimeters. I'm going to show you a few of these. So that's the photograph of mud. I'm inspired by scientists and community groups that are working to protect and restore coastal ecosystems. And for that reason, I included information panels about several in the project. I had panels about the work of the Solent Oyster Restoration Project, Bird Aware Solent, and the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project, and those were part of the exhibition. I also programmed talks from marine biologists about these projects during the museum exhibition. One of the pleasures for me of this project was learning about wetlands life from biologists. I visited with Dr. Joanne Preston, who is at the Institute of Marine Sciences at the University of Portsmouth. And I learned about her fascinating work on the interconnected restoration ecology of coastal habitats, in particular oyster reefs, seagrass, and salt marsh. She is the lead scientist on the Solent Oyster Restoration Project. When I visited with her, Dr. Preston gave me a lattice that is used to create reefs for oysters to grow on. These look like plastic, but actually are made from potato starch. I used the lattice she gave me to make this print, which I called Oyster Dreams Lattice. And that's a panel about the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project. If you haven't gathered already, mud figures prominently in both exhibitions, as all wetland life depends upon mud. This is Mud Map 1. And this was also derived from a photograph of mud with the color dropped out and layered with a scanned drawing. Depending on where the viewer stands, there were 4 sight lines, and this is one of the sight lines looking west. Okay, and now we're going to move from the seafront to the Worthing Museum and Art Gallery for Fugitive, which was also an exhibition of digital prints that I did for the museum. I designed the prints here to work within the space of the gallery and its Edwardian architecture, and to draw your eye around the space. The scale of the prints needed to be large enough to overcome the many visual distractions in the space, but not too large that they pixelated. These tidal landscapes change constantly, and I wanted the work to convey a sense of fluidity and mutability. The horizontal format of the prints also relates to wetland landscapes, which are low to the ground at sea level. This print is titled Bewley Double Tide. For complicated reasons of geomorphology that I don't completely understand, there are 2 linked mini high tides in Solent and Southampton waters. Here I was playing around with the idea of doubling an image. In this case, the photo of the mud pile and low tide along the Bewley River. If I had to select my favorite wetland plant, it would be samphire or glasswort. It grows just below the high tide line, and its small succulent branches change from green to yellow, orange, and red in the fall. It's crunchy, salty, and edible, and sold and served with seafood. It also can be used in mitigating pollution by taking up chemicals in the water, such as heavy metal residues from mining. But you wouldn't want to eat it if it's growing in toxic areas. I worked with the image of glasswort in several prints. Here is Swimmer and Samphire Black. And this one is Purple Sprouting with the color inverted through the magic of Photoshop. I toured Leamington Reserve with Lizzie Hibbard, a marine ornithologist at Birdware Solent. She showed me redshanks and avocets and their chicks. She also pointed out the extensive overgrowth of algae resulting from agricultural runoff and the dumping of sewage. This algae deprives wetland plants and animals of oxygen, leading to dead zones. It starts off a bright green color and then bleaches in the sun to a golden green. I was thinking about this color in the print that I've called All That Glitters. I was shocked to learn that Southern Water have continued dumping raw sewage in coastal waters, even after being handed a record £90 million fine. This piece is called Shingle. I'm drawn to double-edged imagery that is both visually appealing and a sign of climate change, as on the left side of this print. It's an image of water splashing against wooden groins near the mouth of the Bewley River. With each tide, the water sculpts a succession of shrinking organic forms from the wooden groins. New groins built nearby have the Sisyphean task of holding off coastal shrinkage in the face of rising sea levels. And on the right, it's an image of sea kale growing on the shingle on Hurst Spit in Key Haven. It's a beautiful plant with purple stalks, another edible coastal plant declining in the UK, as shingle beaches are threatened by development, coastal defenses, and rising sea levels. Wetlands are so critical both to the creatures that live in them and to us. Besides supporting populations of fish, birds, and shellfish, they help protect coastal communities from erosion and flooding. Art allows us to see and think about landscapes in ways we hadn't previously imagined. That certainly has been the case for me in making this work about South Coast wetlands. I hope that connecting with what is particular and beautiful in wetlands might spark curiosity and encourage us to learn about and protect them. And that's the end. So should I stop the share?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's really interesting. And I would like to kick off with a question, and
Sure.
then I'll throw it open for conversation. I'm curious to hear a little bit about the kind of response you got to the work on the seafront, and whether you had a sense that people actually read the material, how important was it that they read the words,
Right.
and so on.
Yeah. Well, in part, I don't know. In part, I know that it was varied. I mean, the day we were installing it, some women stopped by and looked at it and said, I don't like any of these. I don't know why they even bother. So, you know, at any time you have work out in the public space, you're going to have a huge range of response. You're going to have people who are really captivated. You're going to have people who learn something. You're going to have people who say that's nice, and you're going to have people who say they hate it. So in answer to your question, you know, when I was on the days that I was there to photograph or to meet someone, you know, I would have a few chats with people as they were going by, but, you know, I don't really know. The other thing that I did, though, was program talks at the museum with the biologists that I met, and those were quite well attended. So I do think there's a constituency in the area that's quite concerned about the coast and quite involved with the seafront. But that said, there's also the local alcoholics and druggies who hang out in the beach shelters. So, you know, but, you know, it's a great opportunity to have work in the public space, because even though the museum is free, so many people still don't go into a museum. Sure. And if it's out on the promenade, they have no choice. It's there.
Well, that's the beauty of putting work into the public domain.
Exactly. Yeah.
For better or for worse.
Yeah.
Jackie, do you want to come in and ask your question, or shall I read it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, your work is very geometrical, and then there's a lot of circles as overlays, and I wondered if that was particularly symbolic in some way.
It's a good question. I've had it before. Yes, I love geometry and I love pattern, and I couldn't help myself. However, it is also the case that the ceiling of that gallery, which is glass, it's an atrium, has some little clear panels that have holes punched into them so that the room doesn't overheat and the condensation doesn't accumulate on the glass roof. So it was a little nod to those little plastic pieces with holes cut out of them that were up above in the gallery. It's also something I've worked with quite a lot before. So all of which is to say, I have to keep myself entertained and do the things that I love to do.
Behind you.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, Jackie. Anybody else like to come in and ask a question or make a comment about the work? And
the other thing I would say is that, you know, a project like this or when I was doing the project in London about the river, it gives you an incredible opportunity just to go out and hang out and look and listen and spend time. Not that one needs an excuse to do that. You don't need an excuse to do that, to go to a reserve and look at the birds and watch the tide move. But in the course of doing that, you have a really wonderful experience. And so that's the benefit.
So again on the seafront, were those structures? They have a wonderful name, and I can't remember the name you were.
Gabions, I think. Yeah.
Were they made specifically for this project?
No, they were made in 2020, and there were 2 previous photography shows that were there.
Right. So it is
and they're permanent. And
yeah.
I have to commend Worthing Borough Council for having put them there. And they're also showing work in the beach shelters and other structures on the seafront. So, they're being very proactive, which is wonderful for artists.
And did that coincide with the museum?
Yes, the seafront show went up in late October and is coming down today. And the museum show was on from early February to May 1st. So they overlapped, which is, great.
And I wonder if, is there, as you were making this work and you were combining that with learning more about the science of restoration, I just wonder if there's anything that completely surprised you or shocked you in some way, or just kind of made you pause?
Well, I would say that wetlands on the South Coast are just inundated with algae, just huge masses of algae, and it's really sad. They're being choked to death. And like I said, Southern water is continuing to dump raw sewage. There's agricultural runoff. I mean, one can despair. I would say that, the antidote to that was the biologist's work, and Joanne Preston in particular, who is so passionate about what she's doing and thinks it's really possible to bring back, seagrass and oysters and have the benefit of that filtration in those ecosystems. So, if I just think about it, I will get terribly depressed, but it was great for me to meet a couple of the people who are working, to reverse the damage.
Yeah, there's a lot of work being done around here, particularly in Plymouth, with restoring those beds. And on one level, the fact that water companies can just continue to dump and just pay the fine and
But they don't even pay the fine. Southern Water hasn't paid its previous.
Well, they haven't even paid their fine. So
yeah,
we're unlikely to have a government that's going to hold them to account. But
that's the problem.
Let's not go down that route. Thank you, Anne. I want to bring Rowan in to hear a little bit about, which is also to do with the coast as well. So, Rowan, do you want to come and join us?
Hello. Yes. Can you hear me all right?
We absolutely can. Yes.
You absolutely can. Oh, brilliant. Okay. All right. So my name is Rowan, Jacqueline, and I'm a performer, a director, and I write. And I'm here today to talk to you about a project that I've been doing, working with since the beginning of lockdown, okay, called A Peculiar Shade of Blue, and it's a filmic study on the nature of grief. Okay, so I'm just going to get my screen share going. Hang on a sec. All right. Okay, good. Are you able to see this?
Yeah, all good.
Okay. So this is me. So my practice I term as earth engaged performance research. And that's I think the most concise way to describe what it is and how it works. The focus is really on the body and the movement. I'm looking at the relationship specifically between the earth and the body and the conversation that actually happens between them. And it's important to say I've been working with this over a period of 20 plus years. It's not evolved in an academic environment. I left college, my degree, and went straight into acting in physical performance in classical forms. And so it's really kind of evolved on the floor and inside of facilitating groups. And here I spent about 5 years inside of performance. And what you can see here is the very first performance of taking that idea, that concept, way back in 1997. So that's a real blast from the past there. My work is really rooted inside of the relationship with the audience as well. It's very, very interactive. And here this particular performance was working with a production around fairy in Highgate Woods. So since this point in time, it's had a long journey to come to where it's come to now. So that's just a brief look. And these are some recent snaps and some shoots of some work I did a while ago. And what I'm looking at is how the body reflects the language of nature. There's a fundamental understanding that we are, as human beings, born of the substance of earth. And so when we allow the body to move in dialogue inside of a natural environment, it's not only the human expression that comes through here, it's the innate language that we hold inside our form when we connect with the natural environment. How does that express itself? What is the language that wants to come through? Okay. So, and there's a few pictures of the places. The work's gone all over the world. And again, you can see some pretty large groups going on there. And so the group work really does feed the form. Right, so a peculiar shade of blue, as I say, started in 2020 really, so it's been in development for a good couple of years now. And I think that for myself inside of lockdown, I felt incredibly confronted by death. And what I could see inside of the whole picture was a real difficulty in how we as a Western culture manage grief, how we relate to grief and work with it. So if you go to the write-up on the first Friday, I've given the outline of the story in more detail and how the project's come about. But that was basically the seed. So I live in Cornwall, and my work has gone really, really out onto the landscape. So as you can see from this image, that there is a whole dialogue going on here with what's quite an epic landscape. And the place is Low Bar there. Okay. And so moving into the project and as a starting point, and understanding like, yeah, grief is an issue here. And from what I can see, it's a real struggle for so many people to truly express and move through. I began to unpack that, and as a movement practitioner, is that when we grieve, it's like it's an extraordinary force. It's a very physical force. It takes over the body if it's allowed to. So my interest as a movement practitioner is to actually follow that through. Also, there's a very strong root within Spider Flowers practice in terms of our relationship with time, and needing to slow time right down in order to allow that earth body language to open up, so we can actually hear it and see it and communicate it, to move inside of that communion. So there's a very strong choice being made right at the beginning to work with slow cinema, and to also engage with the natural environment in terms of deep time. So we really start to allow the nuances and the language of the deep time that lives inside the rock and the wind to come through and communicate through the movement. So those were my starting points and seeds. But beyond this, in terms of every session that I go into, is that there's a real strong discipline that I must work with the unknown. Because if we're working with deep time and that really innate language that exists between body and earth, there is an awful lot that we don't know. And we have to be extremely careful not to impose and not to get in the way. So it needs quite a deep level of courage to go into the depths of the self and allow, quite unexpected expressions to come to the fore. So the project then moved into 6 different stanzas, and each of these stanzas open up a world of grief, a world inside grief, because when we do open grief up, and if we look at it like landscapes, then we'll find there are very, very different stages that we actually go through, very, very different expressions. It's an absolutely huge area. And so my concern was that I didn't get lost. And so what I did is that I anchored each stanza inside either a sensate or a biological expression of grief. A hollow is that hollow feeling, and the snot is totally obvious because we all produce this. So it's moving inside of a universal language that's common to us all. But also each one of those stanzas, I'm looking for a bridge between the natural world and the human body as well. So I'll just walk you through stanzas here. So hollow is stanza 1, and this is the only stanza that was really devoid of, it was purposely devoid of anything natural. I'm working with a really enclosed space, man-made environment there, and it's really dealing with the suppression of grief, and also exploring the natural and organic gestures that come about. And here's a little clip here. and really pushing that slow time element of the first few seconds of the first few minutes of hollow. I think with Richard, how long have I got?
I'm just going to give you another 4 minutes, really.
Okay, fine. So with Hollow, the really important thing with that is that all of this was filmed inside of lockdown, so it has that atmosphere to it. It's held the atmosphere. So stanza 2, Threshold, deals with the meeting place between realities and worlds inside of grief. Really rooting in that sense, that feeling that when we lose someone, we can still feel them and still sense them. Working very much with the element of air, the ether, straight lines, and those thresholds of communication. Stanza 3, Snot, then goes into the realm of grief that is unseen, forbidden, grotesque, not allowed, unacceptable. And this stanza takes the relationship with grief and time a lot deeper. So we're looking at grief as an ancient expression, and also within the age of the earth, of the rocks, this particular cave system that I was working with. And it was very interesting in terms of allowing the camera to witness the movement and the relationship. When I brought it back home, brought the footage back home, I'd very often see things inside of that story that I wouldn't witness. And Snot in particular really began to morph time between the past and the future. And that pain level it then becomes like birth. And so it very naturally led into the activity happening around while I was filming, which brought in children. And C, stanza 4, then goes into that relationship, into that birth relationship, really focusing on the future and the children. Bringing that way in. Stanza 4 was filmed almost entirely underwater, and so brings us to that very pure expression inside of grief that lands inside of love. But beyond that, for myself, my experience with that was beyond that, the real essence of life. So there's a real exploration within the piece in terms of what grief is, what function does it have for us. I'm really careful as well with the piece within slow time to make it spacious enough so that the audience can find their own resonance, their own story within it. The Salt stanza 5 was a real surprise for myself, as in it really threw up a harsh journey. What I'm doing when I'm working is that I'm allowing whatever's happening inside of the landscape to speak to me. And this beautiful poor dolphin made an arrival one day, and so was very confronting around the harsh reality of death and decay, grief. And as I was moving through the actual the piece, right, allowing it to write itself, the focus went from the personal into the environmental and the grief that lives there for the wider picture. Stanza 6, the final stanza, was titled Rain on Earth, but interestingly enough, as I moved through salt, there is not a drop. And yeah, I'll just leave you with a short look at this. Skip through.
I hate to stop this in the middle, Rowan, but I think we probably should, and maybe
Okay.
there's a way that we can share this with people so that they can see the whole excerpt, because it's very hard to show such slow lapses of time.
It's really hard. You've got to like run through them.
So yeah, I'm really sorry to interrupt that,
That's
but
okay, no worries.
we should allow. I'd like to open it up to some questions and some comments. And Manu, I think you've made a couple of comments in the chat, particularly about time, and I think time feels very, very much of the essence in the work and how time speaks. Do you want to come in, Manu? If you're still there.
Yeah, I'm here.
You are, yeah, good.
Well, I mean, first, I just your aesthetic is just really beautiful, and I just really love to know what you said about slow cinema, and sorry, I'm slightly distracted. Yeah, and just listening to you, how you speak, I just felt I was dropping into a different time. I really feel like this work is totally you, and you are embodying it very much. I just got that from how you were speaking about the work, how you are sitting here, and how you communicate to us. And it's very deep work. I'm kind of lost for words to really describe it, but I'm gonna go back to your website and have a look at it in more detail.
Yeah, do. I've just popped up some I'm popping up some links there for you, so please do. And it's really tough to, in fact, a rule of the work is not to squeeze it in. So we're trying to get it into 15 minutes, Richard, so you've got to stop. So yeah, it's I've been really careful that I want it to be experiential. I want it to be more of a sensate experience for the audience than an intellectual one, because I and a vehicle for people to really open up and explore their own grief, because that's what the purpose of the project is. This is what I wanted to do. We've had one film show already with a trial audience, and it seems to work. And time goes very fast, actually. The whole cycle will take about 2 hours, but when you're inside it zooms along.
Can you talk a little bit about that? How the work is presented? Is it a simple film presentation, or how do you see the whole work being experienced?
Good question. At the moment, that's being explored, and it can be a simple film presentation, but it's important because the work is so deep. It's very important to hold the space. So the film show, I asked for people to bring a stone. So I started to engage them before they arrived, and we built a tiny can around some water in the middle of the room. So there's a holding space and a focus. So when we had a break in between the films, there was a place to go to and reflect. And I think further development is that it's got space where you can bring the actual spoken word, you can bring the poetry in, and you can weave it with live performance. So it's open at the minute, but at the minute, what's important are the films and almost like a ritualistic or a ceremonial space to reflect.
And I'm curious also to know what's your, and I'm not talking about funding here, but what's your support mechanism? How, you feel like you're in Cornwall in this kind of slightly epic way over long periods of time, and it's clearly a long body of work there. I just wonder how you, how do you nurture that? How does this work get supported and nurtured?
I'm looking. Let's put it like that. I've worked independently, and my community are amazing. Spiderflower's community are awesome people, but we're quite a small community, and they have pretty much provided the entirety of the funding to do a year's cycle of research and development. It needs to be met with funding from larger bodies, but I really do need to find a space, as in a university or a residency, to support, because I do need those conversations with people like yourselves. That's why I'm here, to challenge me and give me a few prods and ask questions to help the work develop further. So yeah, it can get quite lonely.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely, and in a way, that's kind of what this event, this monthly gathering is for. It is lonely out there, and and the last couple of years, of course, has been particularly odd, from that perspective.
And I think it's been amazing for a lot of artists, though, because it has really catalysed, that blank space has catalysed a lot of creativity, though. So I've really taken advantage of that. Yeah.
I think it came up during our Borrowed Time event back in last November, that grief, actually over the course of that project, which itself was delayed by COVID, became a different conversation, because it became something that began to feel much more present in our daily lives, in a way that I think generally it's a bit removed. It's a bit like your snot stanza, which is about the hidden things. And I just wonder for yourself over this period, because you've been working on this during that very same time, whether it's changed the work in any way, or whether it's affected the work in any way.
When I work, I really read everything that's happening around me, on every level, within me, around me, and I really, hence the name Spider Flower, I really weave on all the levels. So I definitely drank that in, and I allowed it to resonate, and I really I consciously opened it up, and it's very interesting in as we've moved on now, and the bigger picture is now we're looking at Ukraine and grief on a whole different level inside of war. It's very different from where we were with lockdown, and we're now, but there's still resonance. I kind of feel like I'm only touching the edges with it as well. It can go much deeper. It's very brave work, actually, to really open up that language, and I can hit edges where I get a bit scared myself, I have to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's really impressive work, and it occurred to me that it made me think of another body of work that's completely different than yours. But are you familiar with Bill Viola's piece? It was probably 15 years ago that he did this at the National Gallery, where he had actors basically animating old master portraits in very slow time. The facial expressions would change, but it was actually a piece about grief and about what happened at 9/11 and people's reactions to it. And so but it was all faces, as it wasn't about landscape in any way. But it's very much about slow time and watching facial changes happen very slowly. So if you first, and they were, it was shown on flat screens, you first would look at it and think nothing was happening. But as you embedded yourself in it, you began to feel the things that the actors were doing in your own body, because it was so slow, and because, so I think, again, completely different kind of work, but it parallels what you're doing in a certain sense.
It was an utterly extraordinary piece, and of course came from a body of work which is also very much about slowness and about kind of bodily interaction.
No, I'd love to see that, actually. I'm not familiar with the piece. I'd love to. I think, with emotion specifically, we so need to slow it down to understand it. It's like, how well do we understand grief? And the more I worked with it, the more I worked through it, and became so aware of how ancient the language is, that it to me, I got to a place where it actually feels like this is the language of the holy, when I got to see. And there was this very pure expression of grief coming through. And so it was giving me clues and understanding to, like, well, this is, rather than pushing it away and shutting it down, locking it away, actually the gift of it is as far as I've got with it so far, is certainly around rebirth. But we can only really appreciate it when we slow it right down.
I want to say huge thanks to both of you for joining us today, sharing your work, and bringing us some new worlds and some new knowledge. So thank you for that. We are at 2:00, and I don't know how everyone else is feeling, but it's felt like, and how it felt to you guys as presenters, but it felt like it has felt much less kind of crazy, and like there's, I noticed you both actually allowing time to pause and actually look at work, rather than trying to talk your way through it. That was really nice. So what I'd like to encourage everyone to do, I've just put my email in the chat. I'm curious to know, first of all, how you felt differently about this format with 2 artists instead of 3. Another thing we might experiment with is just literally asking people to give 5-minute shots, because they say if you can't say it in 5 minutes, you don't know what you're doing. That's a very different kind of presentation.
I'm gonna go away and cry now. 2 hours.
No, you know, that's about a kind of form of encapsulating work, which is very different from the kind of 20-minute talk. So I would also love to hear from people about how we do this in the future, because I think probably come September, we want to explore bringing people back together physically, but we also know that we don't want to lose this experience, so that so many people who can't come physically can still take part. So please do send me an email, send me a message, and I will eventually work my way through those, and we'll have a thought about where we go from here. But thanks all for joining us today. It's been great to see you all on this beautiful May day, and we'll see you all next time. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Richard.
you very much.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.